My name is Nathan Cole. I'm 27 years old, and up until recently I believed that family meant loyalty. Even through the coldness, the favoritism, and the dismissiveness, I still called them Mum, Dad, because that's what I was taught to do. I never asked why they kept me at a distance, or why my siblings got the love and opportunities I never did. I thought maybe I just wasn't enough. Maybe something in me was missing. But the truth was darker, and it came out with just one sentence. It happened during an argument, not a major one, just another moment where I asked why I was being left out of another family decision. My father turned, stone-faced, and said it without blinking. "You're adopted, Nathan. You're not blood. You'll get nothing when we die." My mother didn't deny it. She didn't flinch. She just crossed her arms, like it had been a long time coming, and just like that, 27 years of quiet confusion crystallized into one cold truth. I had never been theirs. Not really.
I left the house that night without saying a word. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even hurt yet. I was just empty. I sat in my car watching the lights from their windows, realizing that the people I'd trusted my whole life had been hiding something fundamental from me. Not just my adoption, but their resentment. Their decision to treat me like an outsider wasn't emotional, it was intentional. I was never meant to feel like one of them. That was the plan all along.
The next morning, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. The message was from a law office. The voice was calm, respectful. "Mr. Cole, this is regarding the estate of Eleanor Whitmore. Your presence is requested for the reading of her will." Grandma, Eleanor. My father's mother. The only person in that family who ever made me feel seen. The one who made me birthday cakes from scratch. Told me stories about her childhood, and called me my Nathan like it meant something. I hadn't seen her in nearly a year. My parents always found a way to keep me from visiting too often, claiming she was tired, unwell, needed rest. I never questioned it, but hearing her name now, after what had just been said to me, struck something deep. I didn't hesitate. I called the office back, confirmed I'd be there, and then I waited, not for revenge, but for understanding. What I got instead was a truth so powerful it turned everything upside down. The law office was in a quiet part of town, tucked between a florist and an old bookstore. It was the kind of place that smelled like leather, paper, and secrets. I arrived early, dressed in a suit I hadn't worn since graduation. My palms were sweating, but I kept my face calm. I didn't know what to expect. I only knew that something about this didn't feel ordinary. Grandma didn't have extravagant tastes, but she had a sharp mind, and if she had left something behind, it was for a reason. The lawyer was an older man named Harris. Silver hair, calm voice, piercing eyes that felt like they could read you before you spoke. He greeted me kindly and gestured toward a chair in the small wood-paneled room. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Cole," he said. "Your grandmother left very specific instructions regarding her estate. You're her sole beneficiary." I blinked. "What?" I asked. He repeated it. "You, Nathan, are the sole beneficiary of everything." I couldn't breathe for a moment. Sole beneficiary. Every word felt heavy with meaning. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were the papers, the will, the signed documents, the accounts. But what caught my attention most was the envelope at the bottom. Cream-colored, handwritten. My name, in Grandma's cursive. "Please read this in private," the lawyer said gently. "There are things in there, things you deserve to know." I drove to the lake after that. Our lake. The one where Grandma used to take me as a kid to feed ducks and watch the sunset. I parked, turned off the engine, and opened the letter with trembling fingers. It began with her handwriting, "My dearest Nathan," and then everything I thought I knew unraveled. She had known. About how they treated me, about the lies, about the truth of my adoption, and more than that, how they'd planned to leave me with nothing. They resented me for keeping you close, she wrote, because you were never just adopted, you were chosen. And they never understood that love doesn't come with conditions. I kept reading, tears threatening to spill. She told me how she had tried to protect me in quiet ways, savings accounts in my name, investments, documents, everything had been planned for this moment. And now she was giving me the power they tried to strip away. The will confirmed it all. Properties, bank accounts, stocks. But what mattered more than the money was the truth. I hadn't been unloved. I had been protected by the one person who saw what I was too young to understand. And now, she was giving me the last word. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I held the pen. I didn't drive home that night. I just sat there by the lake, reading her letter over and over, feeling the words settle into the broken places they left behind. There was no anger in her handwriting, no bitterness, just clarity and love, the kind I hadn't known I was starving for until I read it. She wrote about how she had seen the distance growing, how my parents whispered behind closed doors, how they treated my kindness like weakness. But she also wrote this: "You were never less, Nathan. You were more than they could handle." The next morning I called Harris and asked if the inheritance was finalized. He said yes, fully executed, no contest. Grandma had been thorough. Her estate plan had been airtight, no loopholes, no appeals. I asked him, did my parents know? He paused, then answered, they do now. That was all I needed to hear. The silence on their end wasn't just shock, it was rage that couldn't be voiced without exposing the truth. For once they couldn't twist the story, they couldn't shame me or cut me out. I was the one holding the door now. I didn't act out of spite. I didn't post about it. I didn't flaunt it. I just made quiet moves. I hired an accountant, a lawyer of my own. I started planning. I took ownership of the lake house, the one they always told me was too expensive to maintain. I made renovations, not for luxury, but for legacy. It became mine. It had always felt like mine when I was with her. Now it was real, and every board I replaced felt like a small reclamation of everything they'd tried to erase. But I wasn't done. There was one thing left that Grandma mentioned in her letter. A safety deposit box. Harris had the key. I picked it up the next day. Inside the box were 3 things: a flash drive, a photograph, and a notarized letter, one I recognized but had never seen before: adoption records. Not just legal but personal, letters between Grandma and my birth mother. Real letters, honest ones, full of pain and hope and sacrifice. My hand shook as I read them. My birth mother had chosen my placement, not through an agency but directly through Grandma. They had lied to me my entire life about how I came to be with them, told me I was left behind, that I should be grateful. But the truth was, I had been placed in their care by the one person who trusted them, and they betrayed that trust every day. They treated me like baggage. So, I made a decision, not just to confront them, but to do it on my terms. I didn't rush the moment. I let it simmer. I gave myself a week to think, to breathe, to not react from a place of pain, but from power. I knew if I showed up furious, they'd spin the narrative, call me ungrateful, dramatic, emotional. That had always been their game, but I wasn't playing it anymore. I was walking in as the man Grandma had written to, the man she believed in. Not a victim, not a wounded child, but someone who knew exactly what he was doing. I chose a Sunday afternoon, the kind of day they'd expect me to stay away. I pulled into their driveway in a quiet car, nothing flashy, nothing loud, just presence. The porch light was on even though it was still daylight. Funny how that detail stuck out. Like the house was trying to be welcoming, even if the people inside never were. I stood at the door for a moment, breathing in the stillness. Then I knocked. My father opened it. The expression on his face was hard to describe, part surprise, part defensiveness, part something else he didn't have a word for. My mother appeared behind him, arms folded like armor. "Nathan," she said flatly, "we weren't expecting you." I nodded. "I know." He stepped inside without waiting for permission. That was new, and they felt it. The shift, the air had changed. I didn't start with money. I didn't mention the inheritance. I started with truth. I handed them a copy of Grandma's letter. I watched my mother's fingers tighten on the edges as she read the first few lines. My father didn't speak. His silence said everything. "You knew," I said softly, "and you lied. Not just about my adoption, but about who I was to her. You tried to erase her love for me." My mother snapped first. "She always coddled you, made you soft. You wouldn't have survived in this family without her." I looked her in the eyes and said, "You're right. I wouldn't have. And now, thanks to her, I don't have to." I placed a second envelope on the table, a legal notice of transfer of ownership. The lake house, mine. The home they used to vacation in before locking me out of that part of their world. Now, officially out of their reach. "You're making a mistake," my father said, voice tight. "Family matters more than inheritance." I turned to him and said, the one thing that had burned in my chest since that night he told me I'd get nothing. "You're right again, and that's why I'm no longer part of this one." I walked out of that house, slowly, calmly, not triumphant, resolved. I wasn't coming back, not as a son, not as an outsider. I had everything I needed now, and I hadn't raised my voice once. I drove straight from their house to the lake house. Mine now, legally, officially, undeniably. As I pulled into the gravel driveway, I looked up at the porch where I'd once sat with Grandma, shelling peas and listening to her hum songs from her childhood. I felt her presence more now than I ever did in that house I grew up in. This place was built with love, not control. It was quiet here, not the kind of silence that hides tension, but the kind that heals. Inside, I placed her letter on the mantel. I unpacked the photo from the safety deposit box, a picture of me at 6 years old, fast asleep on her lap, both of us wrapped in a quilt she made herself. She had written a note on the back, "He is mine in all the ways that matter." I stood there for a long time, holding that photo, knowing that even in the middle of all their lies, one person had told the truth, with her love, her actions, and now her legacy. Over the next few weeks, I quietly reshaped my life. I moved out of my old apartment, transferred my job to remote, refurnished the lake house. Nothing extravagant, just mine. I didn't tell anyone from the family. They didn't deserve updates, but word got around. I started getting messages from cousins, from distant relatives, some curious, some pretending to check in, but I knew what they were really doing, fishing, looking for cracks, wondering if the rumors were true. I ignored most of them, but one message caught my attention from my younger cousin Leah. She'd always been different, kinder, softer. "I'm sorry," she wrote. "I didn't know how badly they treated you. I wish I had." I invited her for tea. We sat on the porch, just like I used to with Grandma, and talked for hours. About the family, about the lies, about how quiet abuse looks so different from the kind people recognize. I didn't need her to apologize. I just needed someone else to see it. That was the beginning of something I hadn't expected, healing. Not just for me, but for the parts of the family that were never allowed to speak. Leah told me stories I never knew, about how my parents isolated Grandma in her final months, about the arguments over money, about how they tried to make it seem like she was losing her mind, but she wasn't. She had been sharp until the end. sharp enough to protect me even after she was gone. I realized then that my inheritance wasn't just about wealth. It was about truth. A truth that had been buried under shame, bitterness, and control for decades. And now that it had surfaced, it was reshaping everything. I started going through the rest of the documents Grandma had left behind. Journals, correspondence, financial ledgers. Everything was organized, intentional. She hadn't just left me money, she had left me a map. In one of her final entries, dated just months before her passing, she wrote, "Nathan will come into this when he's ready. Not when they want him to, when he is ready." Those words hit differently. For the first time, I wasn't catching up to someone else's expectations. I was walking into a life someone had prepared for me, in love. But the family wasn't done with me. Rumors began circling that I manipulated Grandma, that I took advantage of her declining health, that I planted seeds to get the money. It didn't surprise me. When people lose power, they rewrite history to make sense of their loss. But I stayed silent. My lawyer reminded me I owed them nothing, not a word. And silence, I was learning, speaks volumes when it's backed by undeniable truth. Then came the letter delivered by courier, stamped with a firm I knew well, my parents' attorney. It was cold, clinical, and full of veiled threats. They wanted to review the estate documents for discrepancies. They requested clarification on several transfers of ownership. I smiled, because I knew what that really meant. Desperation. They had nothing to stand on, and they were grasping, still believing that intimidation could unravel something built in trust. I forwarded the letter to Harris. His reply was just one sentence. "Everything is sealed. Let them spin." That's when I decided it was time to take one more step. Not for revenge, but for peace. I wrote a letter of my own. Short, measured, final. I sent it to their home, addressed only to them. It read, "You told me I would get nothing, but I already had the one thing you could never understand, someone who believed in me. I don't need apologies. I don't need your version of the story. I just need space. Do not contact me again." I didn't expect a reply. I didn't want one. This wasn't a plea. It was a closing. A sealed envelope on a chapter that no longer deserved my energy. I had spent enough of my life trying to earn love that should have been freely given. Now I was learning what love really looked like. And it had Grandma's handwriting all over it. As the weeks passed, something strange started happening. I began to feel lighter. Not because the inheritance solved everything, but because I had finally stepped out from under the shadow of their control. That constant, silent pressure to prove I belonged had disappeared. I no longer lived in fear of being disowned, dismissed, or degraded. They had already made their position clear, and now I had made mine. I was no longer waiting to be chosen. I was chosen by someone who saw me before I saw myself. I spent more time at the lake house than I expected. The solitude didn't feel lonely. It felt sacred. Each room carried echoes of her love. The way she always left tea warming on the stove. The worn-out rocking chair she claimed helped her think better. I began to renovate, not to erase the past, but to preserve it. I turned the attic into a reading room, lined with her old books. I restored the garden she had once tended in silence after long family dinners. In every nail, every stone, I felt her hands guiding mine. Then one evening, while organizing a box of her keepsakes, I found something I hadn't seen before, a small velvet pouch with my initials embroidered on it. Inside was a gold pocket watch, still ticking. Engraved on the back were the words, "To the one who stayed kind, even when they weren't." I sat there for a long time holding it, letting the weight of those words settle into my bones. She had seen it all. She hadn't needed to say much. She let her love speak when words weren't enough. Meanwhile, the noise from the rest of the family began to fade. Whether it was embarrassment, shame, or exhaustion, they stopped trying to reach out. I wasn't naive enough to think they'd changed. But I understood now that they had lost their ability to control the narrative. Grandma had done something they never anticipated. She told my story in her will, in her letter, in every act of protection she left behind. I started journaling again, not to relive the past, but to mark the moment I began living outside of it. I wrote down memories of Grandma, lessons she taught me, the quiet kind that don't sound profound until life proves them true. When people show you small kindnesses, she once said, they're giving you a map to who they are. I used to think love had to be loud, but now I understood the beauty of quiet love, the kind that holds you when no one else does. I still hadn't told anyone outside the family about the inheritance. Not out of secrecy, but because it wasn't about the money, it was about the message. She trusted me to carry forward the truth. And I would do it the way she taught me, without noise, but with unwavering grace. Word finally made its way around town, not through me, but through whispers that always find their way to the surface. I started noticing glances at the grocery store, not unfriendly, just curious. Some folks stopped to chat, not about the inheritance, but about Grandma. She used to bake pies for the school fundraisers. She taught me to sew when my mom got sick. It was then I realized she hadn't just raised me in love. She had built something bigger than herself in the community. And now I was holding that thread. I got a letter in the mail from the local community center. They wanted to rename the library wing in her honor. I didn't even hesitate. I donated enough to renovate the space and add a children's reading room. When they unveiled the new plaque, it simply read, Eleanor Whitmore, a quiet light. That's what she had been. And in that moment, watching kids pile into the room with wide eyes and books in their hands, I felt her legacy expand beyond me. That's when I understood the real purpose of her gift. It wasn't for me to hold, it was for me to use. One afternoon, I returned to the lawyer's office to sign off on the final property transfer, an apartment building Grandma had owned quietly for years. She had kept the rent low for struggling families, never bragged about it, never even mentioned it. Harris told me she'd once said, Nathan will know what to do when the time comes. So I kept her promise. I didn't raise the rent. I improved the plumbing, repainted the walls, and started offering financial planning seminars in the community room. I wasn't just inheriting wealth, I was inheriting her values. But not everyone was celebrating. I received a message from my brother, the golden child, the one who used to mock me when I was little, call me the charity case under his breath. His message was full of thinly veiled resentment. So I guess you won the lottery, huh? He wrote. Must be nice to buy your way into Grandma's heart. I stared at the screen for a long time before I replied. Then I typed 6 words. You never even tried to earn it. I didn't hear from him again, but I knew the silence meant something had hit. The truth is, I wasn't trying to prove anything to them anymore. That part of me had died the night they said I'd get nothing. What I was doing now, building, honoring, repairing, it wasn't for show, it was for the boy I used to be. The one who sat at the edge of family photos, unsure if he belonged. That boy now owned every corner of the frame. Fall came to the lake house with a kind of beauty that felt cinematic. Golden leaves scattered the porch, the air crisp with that particular stillness you only get when you're no longer waiting for anyone to return. I found peace in the quiet routines. Morning walks by the water, journaling in Grandma's chair, hosting dinners for neighbors who remembered her with warmth. I wasn't filling her shoes. I was walking beside her memory finally at my own pace. One evening, while reorganizing boxes of old letters and documents, I found something unexpected. Tucked between recipe cards, and folded newspaper clippings was a sealed envelope addressed to my birth mother. Unsent, Grandma had written it in the weeks before she passed. Inside, the letter was short, but devastatingly sincere. He is more than I ever imagined. He is strong, quiet, good. I kept my promise to you. I hope somehow you'll know. I sat in silence for a long time after reading that. There was so much grief between those lines, but also so much pride. I looked into the adoption records again, not to reopen wounds, but to understand more of where I came from. With Harris's help, I reached out through confidential channels. No pressure, no expectations. Just a message. If you ever want to know the man your son became, the door is open. I didn't know if she would respond. I wasn't chasing her. I just didn't want the last lie of my life to be the silence between us. Then, just as the leaves started to fall heavier, I received a simple reply. Thank you. I always hoped he was loved. That was all. No names, no promises, just the echo of a mother who had let go in faith. I wrote back. She kept that promise, and now I'm carrying it forward. Meanwhile, my parents remained silent. I heard whispers that they'd downsized their home, sold off assets, even argued with extended family over what they were owed. But no one owed them anything, least of all me. They had made their choices, not just in the heat of a moment, but through years of exclusion and coldness. The inheritance only exposed what was already broken. It didn't break them. Their hearts did that on their own. And me? I was building something entirely different. I hosted a small scholarship in Grandma's name for local foster kids who had aged out of the system. I set up a trust to keep the lake house in the family, not their family, but the one I was now choosing day by day. One built on truth, on kindness, on intentional love. I had been discarded like a footnote, but I had become the story they would never be able to erase. The first snowfall came early that winter, blanketing the lake house in white. I stood at the window, coffee in hand, watching as the shoreline disappeared under the hush of fresh snow. It reminded me of the winters I spent with Grandma, when she'd light candles around the house and tell me, snow has a way of reminding us what's sacred. I never understood that as a boy, but now, with the world quiet and the house warm, I finally did. Sacred was a life lived honestly. Sacred was choosing peace over proving a point. I received one final letter from my parents around Christmas, handwritten, formal. They didn't ask for forgiveness. They didn't apologize. They simply said, "We hope you understand the pressure we were under, raising someone who wasn't ours. We did what we thought was best." That was it. No warmth, no ownership, just the final exhale of two people still clinging to a lie that never served them. I didn't respond, not because I was angry, but because there was nothing left to say. You can't reply to a letter that never really saw you. Instead, I sat down and wrote my own letter, not to them, but to myself, to the boy I had been. I wrote, "You were never the mistake. You were the mirror. They just didn't like what they saw when you started standing in your truth." I folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer of Grandma's desk, because the past didn't need to be forgotten, just honored properly and put to rest. New Year's came, and with it, something unexpected, a phone call from the city. They were launching a mentorship program for at-risk youth, and someone had nominated me to be on the advisory board. I didn't even ask who. I just said yes, because if Grandma taught me anything, it was that the best use of what we've been given is to give it forward. So I stepped into that role, not as someone who had it all figured out, but as someone who had once been left out and chose to build his own door. At the first community meeting, a teenager approached me. "Are you really the guy who got left out of a will and then ended up owning half the town?" I laughed. Something like that, I said. He smiled. My mom says you're the only adult she trusts in this place. I nodded and told him what Grandma once told me. The people who try to silence you are always the loudest when you find your voice. I had found mine. Not in courtrooms or social media call-outs, but in the choices I made after being discarded. And now, I was finally writing my own legacy. Spring arrived like a quiet reward. The ice melted off the lake in slow ripples, and the garden I had revived for Grandma began to bloom with new color: irises, peonies, hydrangeas, flowers she had planted decades ago, now growing under my hands. It felt like a conversation between us, carried through time, a living memory. I sat on the porch one morning watching the sun rise through the mist, and I realized something. I no longer lived with a wound. I lived with a scar, healed, visible, and mine. The pain of my parents' rejection no longer owned me. Their voices, once so loud in my head, had quieted into irrelevance. I didn't need their recognition. I didn't need their guilt. I didn't even need their change. The life I had now was built from something purer, the unwavering love of a woman who saw me completely, even when others refused to look. I wasn't her second choice. I was her only choice, and she had spent her final years preparing the world to reflect that truth. I still carry her letter with me, folded, worn, memorized. Sometimes, when things are heavy, I read the last line: "Don't spend your life trying to be accepted by those who never deserved your heart. Build the world I couldn't finish. It's yours now." And that's exactly what I'm doing, not out of vengeance, not out of pride, but out of deep-rooted peace. A kind of peace they will never know, because peace requires truth. The lake house has become more than a home. It's a space where others come to feel safe. I host retreats for youth in the system. I run mentorship circles. I open the garden to people who just need stillness. What was once the quiet place Grandma took me to escape their coldness has become a sanctuary of its own. And in every laugh, every healed heart, every seed planted, I see her, still guiding me, still here. I never told my parents where I live now. If they wanted to find me, they could, but I knew they never would, because to face me now would mean facing what they lost. Not just the inheritance, but the kind of son they could have had if only they had chosen love over power. And if you've made it this far, drop a unit in the comments, because some inheritances are written in wills, but the most powerful ones are written in how you rise after they try to erase you.